Welcome to EIPIP Meeting 74. I have just shared agenda in chat. We have a few open issues and pull requests as usual to be discussed on this call, as well as we have another important topic, which is EIP and ERC repo separation. There is a proposal that we will look into, and we'll cover some of the discussion continued from earlier meetings. So let's get going. The first item listed here is a CI upgrade EIP bot to EIP review bot. I think it was suggested by Sam. Sam, if you would like to provide info, and we can discuss this one first.
This is Pandas, actually.
Yeah, it's my PR. Sam was the one that suggested it for the meeting. So currently EIP bot has quite a few bugs, and the code is not easy to maintain. In fact, I'm still not entirely sure where some of the stuff that needs to be fixed even is. I have tried multiple times to fix particularly the bug. That means that PRs that delete files can't be merged, multiple times unsuccessfully. So I really don't even know how to fix that one. So what I did was I made a complete rewrite of the EIP bot. I think the only reason that it's not merged is concerns over if there's some oversight we made that allows PRs to be merged when they shouldn't be. So basically concerns about I have fully tested every part of it manually and have automated tests too. But there is still a chance that something slips through, and I think that's what's blocking it. At some point, it would probably be useful to merge it, maybe try it take a snapshot of the repository and roll and force push it backwards if need be. But I really don't think that there's any bug. I have thoroughly tested it, and there are automated tests.
And as somebody who's reviewed it, it does seem fairly understandable. Yeah.
Matt and Victor, if you guys have any thoughts on merging this one?
Well, I think we probably definitely want to at least probably have a local clone of it so that we can force push if the worst comes to worst and someone does find a way to absolutely break it. But I think it's almost certainly fine.
I mean, it sounds like it's pretty ready to merge if there's tests. You mainly tested it and Sam has taken a look and it looks good.
All right, so consensus is to make the switch.
Inconsistent.
What is happening in your audio?
Mine?
Me?
Damn.
Yeah, sorry, it's a 3D printer.
Cool.
All right. So let's go ahead and merge that. If any of the editors may merge it during the call, it would be nice. Or we can do it after the call as well. And moving on to the next one, which is an issue, I think. It's a new contract interface, and EIP should require to include a privacy consideration section. Anyone has thoughts on this?
I don't think we need another section for it. I feel pretty strongly that if there are privacy considerations for an EIP, they should go in the security consideration section.
I propose an alternative thing, which is that we rename the security considerations section to just considerations and allow subsections, such as a mandatory security subsection and I guess we could also make it a mandatory privacy subsection.
I just don't think that there are that many EIPs that require privacy, like it's on a blockchain, a public.
I don't think there are that many EIPs that require security considerations either. Nonetheless, it's still a required section.
Core EIP should definitely have it, right, even if it says there's a thing.
Yeah, I think we the privacy considerations at the very least should be mandatory for core EIPs. even if there are.
Oh, sorry, I meant security considerations, not privacy. I
Well,
think core EIP should have security, even if
yes,
people just say there's
security
nothing.
considerations are mandatory right now for all EIPs, regardless of type or category.
Are we clear on this part? Like, why do we need privacy? I mean, I can understand if that is something related to, specifically related to ERC, but again,
Well,
when
because
we are
people,
talking about standards, so do we need to have the privacy part? Like, we are trying to make it open source, adaptable by everything. So as much as transparency we can maintain.
yeah, I think it's primarily for, like, as you said, transparency purposes. Like, if something's gonna, like, somehow leak some information, just by the nature of whatever algorithm it uses, that should probably be told to the end user. It also makes, but as someone who has done application development, being able to know what affects the tools you depend on create allows for things like GDPR compliance to be a little bit easier. So that would be my rationale for why it would be a good idea to, at the very least, rename the security considerations to considerations.
So my problem with having it just considerations is my audio any better? Anyone?
Your audio is great.
Okay, so with just considerations is that people are going to try stuffing whatever the hell they want in there that isn't even related to security or privacy. They'll have
That's
like
fine.
monetary considerations and all sorts
I
of
think
stuff.
that's absolutely fine. If there are any considerations, they should be listed. In fact, there might even, like, for example, my EIP, that's the Ethereum notary interface. That I'd like to put a legal consideration in there if possible, but like, that's just like not, and there's no good place to put that. Sorry, train.
How about we add a new other considerations and as optional so that if someone want to bring in privacy, they can bring in there. And if legal or any other things comes up, they can put it there, and we can still keep security considered separate and mandatory.
I was thinking just subsections of the consideration section. So you have top second level considerations, third level privacy, third level security, third level other.
Well, I don't think we're gonna get very far talking about this on the call. Maybe we can make a thread on, or actually discuss this in the issue.
There is discussion on that in the issue. That's in fact the proposal I put there.
So to summarize, the proposal here is to have a renaming of the section security consideration as just consideration, and there could be the different types of consideration depending upon the proposal.
I am fairly against giving people more flexibility. I'd like to not have an other considerations or just a vague consideration section.
I'm also generally against. I do like the idea of people being more cognizant about how their ERC, and I'm saying ERC because I think that there's not many cases where EIPs come into play with respect to privacy, but I do think there are a lot of ERC protocols that should consider how their application deals with user information.
The thing that prompted this was actually an interface EIP. So yes, there are in fact EIPs that would definitely deal with this.
I just don't understand why privacy isn't security. Like, aren't they the same? Like, isn't privacy a subset of security?
Yeah, that was actually me. But like, I definitely still believe in that, but the public perception of them is different, right? Especially since there's a trade-off. Like, privacy and security, there is oftentimes a trade-off there. And so I think it might be meaningful to distinguish that.
Okay, it definitely looks like we have divided opinion here on the call with the present participants. So maybe we can have more discussion going on in the issue section, and if we get more feedbacks there, probably we'll bring it up to the next meeting. Does that sound reasonable?
Sounds good.
Awesome. So we know that we have another topic for discussion today, and that is a proposal to separate EIPs and ERC repo. The proposal is proposed by Tim Bako. We have him on the call. So Tim, if you would like to maybe provide a brief overview so we can start discussing on the topic.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. Also, thank you for all of you. I think almost everyone on this call sort of replied on the thread, so appreciate the engagement there. I guess it's probably worth starting from where this came from, and then we can get into the specifics. But high level, the thing I like, the number one thing I've been focused on and sort of care about is figuring out how do we get to a point where there's a single sort of pretty straightforward process to propose consensus changes to Ethereum. And by consensus, I mean not just consensus layer, but just the changes to the consensus rules of the protocol. And today, I think pretty much everyone here knows, but just for clarity, on the execution layer side, we use this weird thing where we have a yellow paper that's now out of date. We have EIPs that act as layers we apply on top of the yellow paper, and this is more or less what we call our spec, or at least historically that was the case. And then on the CL side, they have a Python spec where they just make PRs to, and that is basically the actual spec of the network. On the technical side, yeah, Sam and his team spent a bunch of time over the past year getting an EL spec up to mainnet, which is great. So I think this gives us a much better sort of technical base on which to specify changes to Ethereum, especially in a post-merge context. And so I think we've done really good work rectifying that part of the process. But the bit that's still quite separate is that we basically use EIPs to specify changes on the execution layer. They don't do that on the consensus layer, and it would be nice that this would be the same thing. And a few reasons why this would be nice is one, you can think of the changes on the consensus layer now matter much more, given that we've merged, the beacon chain is live, and it's all one system. And you can take one very strawman example. You could say, look, the consensus layer can literally just double issuance on the network, do this through some random PR to the specs, and there's not really a great place where it gets documented in a way that's as easy for people to understand as EIP 1234 is the place where the change is proposed. The other bit that's quite hard is when you have changes that affect both layers. So we have two examples of this right now, withdrawals and 4844. And both are pretty awkward. So withdrawals has a hackMD that acts as a sort of meta spec, and then that basically points to the CL repo and the EL repo for the CL EIP and the CL specs, sorry, and the EL EIP to describe the changes. 4844 is this weird sort of EIP where the EL changes are described in the EIP, and then it sort of references without linking the CL specs for the rest. So I think the ideal end state would be something these core EIPs or these core changes get specified in a common way, and then can link out to their respective specs. And talking to client teams, I think people are generally on board with this vision, but I think the biggest challenge is how do we get people on the consensus layer side to want to interact with the EIP process to specify their changes and kind of add this extra degree of formality to their process, which they don't currently have. I think I spent a bunch of time talking to them. They fear that the EIP process is pretty rigid and bureaucratic, and that the sort of friction created from it won't be worth it, and just sort of slows them down. And they would also like to feel like they can like they aren't only the ones that have to comply to the EIP process, but maybe the EIP process and can kind of adapt to how they do things because they might do things better than we do as well. And so this is kind of a long intro, but the idea is like, I think that the main problem I've been thinking about is how do we like create a process for specifying changes to the core consensus rules that is like very, I don't know, like enticing for people on the consensus layer to start contributing to, and ideally that has like lower friction than the full EIP processes that exist today. And then, the sort of second order effect from there is, I think, based on that, you can imagine core EIP starting to like evolve in a way that's different than the rest of the EIP process. And I think this is kind of where the idea of like splitting ERCs and EIPs came out of, where this would be a way to kind of signal like, look, these processes will diverge. This is like the first step in that divergence, and we can kind of then both take them forward in different directions. I appreciate all the arguments that like there's some high technical overhead to do that, so I don't want to like incur all this work just for the sake of it. Like I think it's worth considering the like those drawbacks as well. But I think the sort of meta proposal I have here is like, how do we include CL people and give them a way that's like much more flexible, where like they can start to iterate on the process, even if it doesn't meet whatever bar the current EIP process has. I think it's like we're in a much better spot if we have like quote unquote bad CL EIPs that like don't fit our templates, don't work quite well, than if we have the current status quo, which is nothing, and like them being sort of scared to engage. So yeah, I'll pause here, but that's high level sort of why I wanted to bring this up and kind of the rationale behind it. Yeah.
Here's my thought.
Yeah.
First of all, we need more editors, period. If that's all, or some other system so that more PRs can get reviewed. Once that's done, the EIP process will be a lot less bureaucratic. Secondly, I think that there's no reason why we can't have for example, my proposal to just automatically merge all the drafts. That would make it very easy to get started. And we could even possibly disable, make the validator do warnings for draft EIPs instead of full blocks. So that's my thought. And that, I think, would definitely help people get on board and not require splitting the repo, which it's easier if everything's in one place.
So I'd like to echo Pooja's argument against auto-merging draft PRs, is that a lot of EIPs get abandoned in draft. So the only time editors interact with them is in the first PR into the repository. So I think that's probably the strongest argument against just automatically merging drafts.
I don't get it. Why is that a downside?
Because they'll be terrible.
Yeah,
I think,
but if they're terrible, nobody uses them.
If we serve terrible EIPs from our domain, then it looks bad on us. And I think there is, I mean, I hate to say it, but I think there is some amount of like reputation that we want to maintain, and we want to have a minimum bar for quality for what we publish.
Okay, then we just lower the stagnant threshold for draft EIPs and allow deleting them if they stagnate.
I mean, that is increasing our work. The first thing that we can do at the entry level is like make sure that we are adding only good proposals, even in the draft status. There is nothing wrong in staying as long as they are not ready to be merged as draft, considering that we have now so many channels open. We do arrange this bi-weekly meeting for EIP editing office hour. Authors are welcome to come and talk to us to move the proposal to make them better and then add it as a draft. If we start auto merging them, we are practically losing this space of giving this opportunity to learn.
If I may chime in, I think a team comes in and raise the problem that because of EIP editing has of too many frictions, they want to kind of propose a fork. And I can resonate a lot with that. I'm actually a big fan of reducing the frictions and respect adopters, including allowing much more linking to useful sources. What I feel that we're going into debate is about like whether like in Micro's area, whether we want to accept drop merging or not. That's more practical. But in a high level, do we want to have a forked version? I want to bring to the attention to this group also that there's nothing stopping EL and CL client developers to continue just ignoring EIP fully, which is what they do. And out of respect for this program, team come to us. And I believe that if we could think of how we can reduce the friction for them, that's the only way we can keep the core or other EIP type inside of EIP. I personally feel that I'm totally in support of having core EIP and maybe network EIP and even interface EIP have different rules and different layouts and different merging frictions by different people. What I feel reserved is to have different repository and different domain names to serve them, which has both technical problem as well as it creates confusion for people to understand where to go to look at Ethereum proposals. So what I propose to team and the group is that can we allow a group of core contributors to quickly become EIP editors and for them to make decision about their merging rule, their editing rules. In that way, we can keep this as one single repository. Yeah, that would be my proposal in this.
I agree with that. We could just fast track quite a few core developers into being core EIP editors. And actually, with the new with the new IP review bot, it wouldn't be that hard to make it like a core only, like no website changes, like a slimmed down editor thing that only works for core EIPs and doesn't give general editor stuff.
Before
Sam,
diving
you had
into, before diving into solutions too much here, I want to understand a little bit more about what the problem is. So what is friction? Like, what about our process is difficult for CI people to want to work with?
I can answer that.
Yeah.
It's that we spend to a lot of people, it appears that we spend a lot of time on nitpicky stuff, and I actually somewhat agree with that sentiment. It's just that the reason why we spend so much time on nitpicky stuff is that we want all EIPs to look good, right? That goes back to the kind of the reputation like thing. But I think that we are actually a little bit too nitpicky in some cases, particularly with draft EIPs that aren't even going to see the light of day a lot of the time. But yeah, I think it's mostly
and maybe
time till review.
yeah.
That needs to be reduced.
So I think like I follow the process more closely than like the average consensus layer dev, and I do think it has improved like quite a lot over like the past, I don't know, 6-ish, maybe 12 months. I do think like that those like incremental improvements sort of are perceived against like 4 years of basically stagnation from the CL teams, and I think this is why like there's a bunch of like small tweaks that cause friction, like I mean, and whether this is like the syntax rules, whether this is just I don't know, the templates or stuff like that. I mean, I think like for example the SSZ EIP right now, you could imagine a world where like you just merge the first draft of that and then still kind of have the discussion about like, the improvements after it. But I do think like talking with CL folks is like they just view this as like something that if they sign up for will like slow them down immensely and they might not be able to control. And they sort of add this dependency in their process that like they, I don't know, they're sort of fearful of to some extent. And something that like signals to them that like, they'll be able to like use this process in a way that's like useful for them, even if it's not like completely following sort of current rules. I think that's the thing they would like to see. And whether this is, splitting it out in a separate process in repo, I think that sends that signal. I think the other option of like, yeah, adding some like, potentially even just CL EIP editors or something that that can merge stuff, like even if it's not perfect, that might be good enough to get them to use it. And I think if we went down that route, for example, like it would be worth looking then at like, okay, I don't know, over the past 2 months, like we sort of forced merge these 4 EIPs, what's like the check that they weren't passing? Like what is the thing we overrode in the bot? And that might be like the most useful way to understand like what's like where the friction comes from. But I do think like, there's definitely like a quote unquote irrational fear from the CL side to participate in this. That's based on just like the accumulated perception over a long time rather than like having spent a ton of time sort of actually engaging in the process. And I guess most people it's just, most people don't have a ton of time to engage in the EIP process. Yeah.
Well, once you actually know what the process is and what the formatting and stuff is, then it's actually quite simple.
I
But
think
there is definitely
I think beyond just this like question about being fearful of the process, there's also this problem that the process for getting core EIPs over the line and the process for doing ERCs are different. And we're spending a lot of time trying to come up with rules that work for both of these systems. And we are, just coming up with something that's sort of muddled in the middle. And I think that, to me, is the biggest argument why these should be just separate. Because
so what would you say
going
is
for two totally different.
Yeah.
So what would you say is an example of something that's very different between EIP, like core EIPs and ERCs?
I mean, core EIPs, there's this very specific small group of people that like are actively working all the time to try to make these things happen. And we have very like specific ideas about, trying to come up with certain test cases, writing security considerations about all these things. And for ERCs, it's like a completely wide open world, like anything is possible. We have people who are writing completely new protocols. We have people who are writing additions to protocols. Like they should be thinking a lot more about how can they make the process more amenable to the types of things that they're doing. We don't really have as much of this extension of EIPs usually in core EIPs, but that's like a super common thing for ERCs. All the time they want to add new things to the NFT standard, and it's something that they just keep adding more and more ERCs rather than coming with a more principled top-down approach about how can we just like continue moving the NFT standard forward. And this, to me, is just a problem because nobody is really engaged on that side because we don't want, I mean, it's hard to have them engaged in this process because this is a very important process to core them as well. And so we don't want to just let application developers come in and start defining tons of different like procedural things. And so I think if we make it separate, give them a room to experiment and try different things, then they'll end up with a much better process that suits their needs. We'll end up with a much better process that suits our needs because we'll be able to bring people in who are involved with the core process, who don't have to ever look at any of this in our ERC stuff. They don't have to have these discussions about, we want to make this change. Oh, this change doesn't work as well for ERCs, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, and I think then the question is like, I think there's two levels to that. One is like the technical coupling of the repos, and two is like the quote unquote management of it. So you can imagine a world where like, we keep it all in one repo to like lower technical overhead, but then the process sort of evolve independently or whatnot. And I think there it's like, yeah, maybe you need like you just need time, and over time you see over time you see them diverge, and maybe that leads to a split. I do think like even if you read EIP1 today, there are like all these awkward things around like, core EIPs. And I think there's also this weird question with core EIPs that's different, is like how do they fit with the network upgrade process? And that's always been like a very sort of awkward thing, and potentially having a separate process there. Uh, Potentially having a separate process there helps like converge to something that's like not only a specs process, but it's like a specs plus like statuses mapped to hard fork status or whatever process.
Yeah, because there's two totally different systems.
I
I
don't think it's really
resonate.
different at all.
I resonate and recognize what Tim says. The core EIP already have a different treatment, at least when it needs to move to final. Can we just allow more diverging of the rules, but not forking the repository, allowing more editors from the core team to merge? Would that be a
what is the argument for not
compromise?
forking the repository?
Having everything in one place, allowing core
Nobody
EIPs and
wants it
non-core
all in one
EIPs to
place.
reference one another. There's a lot of arguments for having
When do core
everything in one
IPs need to
place.
reference an ERC or vice versa?
Sorry?
When do core EIPs need to reference ERCs?
Well, say that something relies on an opcode being available, such as, say, the like proxies rely on delegate call.
Also, chain ID proposed by 55 was being referenced in, I believe, ERC's 712, which is both, I personally perceive as both interface and ERCs.
These are extremely simple things to resolve once they're split up. You can say requires this EIP, requires this fork of Ethereum.
I think William Hendry can provide a good argument about not forking, mainly because of the technical the wholeness of the technical side, like a stack people can go to and then see everything together. It is definitely nothing preventing them. You can even break down core EIP into two different repositories for execution and consensus, right? But like
that's what we have right now, and we're trying to unify these things.
So why do you? The reason, the rationale arguing for unifying them can be also leveraged to argue for unifying many of the other stacks. Like because
really. I don't think that's quite true.
The people who are working on these core things, this is one specific group, but they're working on the EL. They care about what the CL is doing. The people on the CL care what the EL is doing. This is like a known group of people. Whereas the application side, like this is also a known group of people, but they're completely disjoint. There's almost no overlap between the people who are building application stuff. There are very, very.
And I mean, people can follow two things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think there is like a separation of concerns, like between what's built on Ethereum versus like the specification of the protocol, right? I think,
absolutely.
Doesn't the protocol just build on itself?
Absolutely not.
Well, I mean,
protocol is constantly being moved forward with upgrades and adding features, but these are like fundamental primitives for application developers to use. This is totally different than building applications on top of the platform.
And adding features on top of the platform to the platform? I don't see much difference at all.
Well, there is, because, like, for example, like the most obvious feature is that a consensus change requires the entire network to adopt it, or the network is going to fork, right? And it's like, and it has to be bug free, otherwise the network, will like enshrine a bug. Like, I think the sort of bar in terms of like consensus building that we require for core EIPs is much higher than an ERC, which is like an opt-in feature. And then I agree. I think, Sam, you were the first to make this point on EIP magicians. Then this is like sort of a spectrum, right? Imagine core EIPs are on one side of it, ERCs are on the other side. Something like an interface EIP is kind of weird because, maybe like sure, not all the clients need to add EAT68, but then if they don't gossip these transactions the right way, it kind of messes up with the, with the network
Well, that one's
gossip layer.
slightly different. That one would be in the networking, the P2P repo. That one shouldn't be EIP really anymore.
Right, but I do, so I think it's like there's two clear spots, right? There's like a standard for like a new NFT royalty thing, which, is opt-in. It has like, there's no sort of, if I never know that it exists, I can use Ethereum and like my experience has not changed. But then there's something like, oh, we're going to double the issuance. And then it's like, wow, everybody who like has a say and like Ethereum should probably be aware of this thing. And this is where like I think core EIPs are different, where like even when we add an opcode, it's like we're asking all the nodes to like update at the same time. And it's really valuable that like this information is like clear. And this is, I guess, back to Matt's point, it's like the fact that we don't have this for the CL today, I see this as like a really terrible sort of failure of the process, because you go to the CL specs, you see like a diff on the specs with like a couple comments, but it's really hard to make out like what are like each features. So like, does this fork introduce 1, 2, or 3 things? You don't have something like a security consideration sections. You don't have something like a rationale. And I think it's just like the process is much less like legible than the EIP process. And like, yeah, rectifying that is like basically the number one thing I care about. Like if we can get to a spot where when we have changes happen on the consensus layer, there's like a handful of EIPs we can point to that say, hey, we've changed validator rewards, we've like updated the fork choice rule, whatever else, like added withdrawals, like that's extremely valuable, because then the community can review those changes, understand them, which is much harder to do today.
I think we are talking about maybe 2 different processes here. So when we are talking about separating repo, my understanding is that we are trying to follow the same process that was being followed so far. And it's just that we are having 2 different forks for ERCs and EIPs. They followed separately. But when we are trying to follow the process which is already being followed by the CL specs, that is going to be a different process than the one currently being followed at EIP repo. So if we happen to follow what CL is doing, then it would be better to.
The proposal was to have a fork, and then the core EIPs doesn't follow any of the existing rule, if I understand it correctly, to reduce
that's exactly what I want to clarify. Like, are we proposing that EIP repo will not be following anything that is being followed so far? We are trying to move towards the different process of the core proposal, which was earlier the execution specs core EIP process.
We're proposing to split the EIPs and the ERCs apart, and then separately develop a process for both of them independently that suits both of the needs in the best way. And part of that is like figuring out how to engage CL devs in the EIP process.
Yeah. And I think I'm weakly opinionated on the order of those 2 things. Like if y'all think that like having the ability to like have CL folks sort of update the process of the core stuff as part of the EIP process as it exists is the right first step, until potentially like there's enough friction that like separating the repos makes sense, and maybe that never happens. Like I'm fine with that, but I think like the most important thing is like, how do we get CL people to feel like they can come and contribute, and that there's very low friction for them to do that. And regardless of the way you do it, it's going to assume that like a sort of higher error bar or like a lower quality bar for CL stuff. And I think we should be very okay with that, because our current status quo is that we don't have an error bar or an error rate or quality rate for like CL stuff, because like they just don't have EIPs, right? So it's almost like we don't see them, but yeah. And I think that's bad. Yeah.
How about this compromise? We introduce a new type of EIP, basically a track EIP, and it's basically it's a different EIP one. it describes an entirely different process, but everything's still on the same repo. So it can all EIPs of different tracks can still interact with one another while still having separate processes.
I don't even think we need a new EIP one. This is sort of what I liked with forking the repos is like, most of the stuff actually stays the same, right? Like, so I don't think you need a separate EIP one. I think, I don't know where the EIP rules are written. Are they in EIP ones or on like the homepage of the website? Okay, but yeah, so I think, yeah, I guess, and maybe, I don't know, the other way I would frame this is like, I would rather lower the friction and then rebuild the process than to try and like proactively come up with the right process. Because I think that's sort of the thing that, it's like if we add a bunch of new process rules to make this work, then we don't know that they're right. And this is sort of the other problem. It's like if we can just, try out a bunch of CL EIPs, see how they differ, and then sort of go from there, I think that gives us a better like starting ground than saying like, oh, we're going to try and think of the right way to accommodate them in a new process and then add a bunch more constraints around that. So I think, yeah.
No, No, I'm like thinking that an EIP one could be changed to a track EIP, and then what we do is basically create a new EIP, depends on EIP one, and just says these conditions don't apply to these EIPs, which would allow for a fast track.
Can you use that in more along with introduction for people to try and understand how the process works?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I think you're just adding more levels of introduction for people to figure out how the process works. It's like, okay, I want to make a change. I usually make a core EIP. Oh wait, EIP 1 just to go look at the other EIP, so I can figure out the type of EIP that I need to make. And it's like unnecessary.
We just document it very clearly.
Yeah, no matter how clearly it's documented, this is like their full-time job. They don't want to spend hours and hours reading about how to like make a change whenever they've been making changes for years.
And I think this is kind of back to what I was saying earlier is like, to me, if we had, someone who can like force merge client CL EIPs, these people are not stupid either, right? Like they do care about their work. They do generally like do high quality stuff. So it's like you start by force merging their stuff in, even though it breaks the rules. Then you sort of retroactively look at like, okay, what rules did it break? How did this thing differ? And you can even imagine a world where like, aside from asking for a title with like a number, that, they don't need anything else, right? Like maybe they don't even use the same sections. Maybe they don't use that. And then it's like, maybe you like over time, sure, you build the separate EIP one that documents this. But I think your odds of like success are much better if you start from allowing them to use it as they would want to use it. And from there, potentially enshrining some things. Or maybe, after 6 months, you tell them, look, you guys never put in the security consideration sections. That's really bad. We're going to force you to start doing it. But at that point, they're already sort of like engaged enough that they can maybe understand like the value of this. Yeah.
Well, then maybe the path forward is we, find somebody from the consensus teams. This is probably the hardest part, that wants to be an EIP editor. We tell them, you can force merge and override whatever you want for CL EIPs. That way they get exposure to the process. It's got to be one of them directly. It's got to be a CL developer, because they need to learn the process, and that's it. We don't change the process at all, because I don't think like it's just a perception of frustration, right? Like the reason why it takes so long is because like for ERCs, at least, we have myself and Panda that do it, right? Like and it is 90% Panda. So like for core EIPs, we have like Matt and Greg and everybody, and they go through a lot faster. There's a hell of a lot less friction than there is for ERCs. So if they add a core EIP editor, they can go as fast as they want. They won't be blocked on anything because they can just approve their own EIPs, and they can force merge if they want.
People can't approve their own EIPs.
Sure, but I'm talking about like as a group, like
Okay.
anybody in
So
the
as long as that dev doesn't
Yes.
write the EIP, yeah. Okay, sure.
So hell, we could add 2. Like it doesn't matter, right? It like
Yeah. Yeah.
and they'll only get notifications about core EIPs, maybe a few random ones, but it's really not that bad as long as you're not on the ERC track. And that way they control exactly how much friction there is. And I
But then
like
some app devs are like, what the heck? They get to just merge their EIPs without doing this, and I have
That's
to deal
fine.
with Validator all the time.
We would be
Oh.
willing to accept that.
Yeah,
so
they can
EPW
Yeah, but I
is
don't
yeah,
want to have to
as-
deal with like the angry app devs. Like I want to put them in their own box and let them flourish in their own
Just-
realm.
Just pin the blame on me.
EPW is not that bad.
Yeah.
I agree, it's
It
not that
even
bad,
tells
but
you how
app
to fix
devs,
it.
I would like to
app
state an
devs
example.
cannot be contained.
I would like
Oh,
to share
no,
an
I'm-
example of a consensus layer proposal, which was considered to be standing in the process for way too long. That was for proposal 4844 to be moved to the review status. So Sam had this discussion in the call we had yesterday, the EIP editing office hour. There was dependency on one proposal to another. So they wanted to have like each 68 to be a part of required section. If we allow people to just keep on force merging and do not follow any process, then it may end up creating chaos. So the simple thing was there to have each 68 in review, and to get each 68 in review, we needed to have each 67 in review. So I talked to Marius, we
Yeah,
just
I think-
created a pull request and it was solved. So I think it is a simple process that
No,
we are
I-
following here.
I think this is exactly the type of thing that you want to like shield CL people from as they start. Like
Right. So for
this
shielding
is
them, yes, for shielding them, we have a group, we have process, and we have people. Like Marius did not have to come and make the pull request. I did it for him. So when we know what is the problem, we are here to help them out. Sam explicitly mentioned in the comment that what we need is to move this into review, and Proto made a PR to make it into review process. So it's not that it is dependent on anybody. It's just that awareness that is lacking in the CL team, and it's the comfort that we have to provide them, that if you're following the right thing, and even if you don't know what is the right thing, we are here to help you out. So let us know what challenges you are facing, and we are here to help you out move it smoothly.
but I guess with
Actually,
their yeah.
I think a
Their
lot
view
of
on that
core
would be they don't
developers.
think it's the right thing. They'll be like, it's just stupid. Why should I like? Why is this rule there? Like, I just want my spec. And I sympathize with like, you know, the reason why the process is there. But I think if you start by like forcing them to follow and like sort of wade through this like labyrinth of like exceptions, and networking EIPs, I think are like every time, like, I don't know, for some reason they sort of end up being the worst ones. But like,
I mean, I think part of it is that the guest team absolutely hates the EIP process and refuses to engage with it. And so, as the people who are making the network EIPs, they make the draft just to get the number and tell the people to implement it, and then they don't ever do anything else with it.
yeah.
But on the flip
Right, and
side,
I think-
they implement
Interface too,
EIPs.
and I've, as you've seen, I've actually gone ahead and tried to get the ball rolling on a few of those interface EIPs.
Sam, you were saying something? I think we missed you.
Yeah, sorry, it's completely slipped out of my brain.
Not a
But
problem.
maybe, okay, so Sam, I think to your previous proposal was like, okay, we add a couple CL folks as EIP editors for core. They can force merge stuff. It's important that they're actually CL people and not just like random people, because this acts as a way to pull them into the process. Does that generally make sense? Because there's a CL call tomorrow. I think it would be, if people here agree with that, then we can just go on the CL call tomorrow and ask if one or two people want to be sort of tributes for this, and kind of go from there. I think the thing is like, yeah, they need to have force merge access for core EIPs, and feel that like, they can sort of own that part of the process, and then through social means we can hopefully align them with the rest of the process. But technically they should have sort of free reign on that small section.
I'd be
I'm
okay
okay
with
with
that.
that.
Okay, so
And
I'm
just
happy
to
to go on
add,
the CL call tomorrow and share that, and I can come back. I mean, you're obviously all welcome on the CL call as well, but yeah, I can go and kind of let them know, and we can go from there.
yeah, and just to add, like getting access is not a big challenge here. We just want to make sure that people having access are really responsible. I mean, I don't mean to say that EIP editors are not responsible. We just want to maintain a few bullet points to be covered over there, and getting the access should not be a problem. And we are
Yeah.
happy to provide all the support to just go through the basics of it. And yeah, it would be great to
Yeah.
have more people in.
And I think one thing also that like we can, in terms of being responsible, maybe one soft requirement we can do is we can tell them, look, you can force merge stuff, but like try and keep that for CL things, right? So like, you know, because I don't think we should add a separation in core EIPs, but like I think it's fine to say that like, you know, EVM changes like shouldn't be forced merging by some CL dev who just is pissed off at the EIP process. Like technically they would be able to do that, but to tell them like, you know, please refrain from that and use this as a way to help CL folks on board. I think that's a reasonable ask.
Speaking of editors, can we make a Xenian one?
Okay, wait, before we jump topics here, I have something else to throw in. Just a heads up that the merge to EIP1 that makes ERCs use ERC dash as a prefix and everything else use EIP dash as a prefix was merged. So I'm in the process of updating EIPW. Be ready for a lot of very angry people being very confused.
I was
We
the
also just
one
finished
who was like,
talking about splitting out ERCs from the EIP repo.
yeah, I was the one, I think, was the one biggest fan of referring them as EIP, considering there was no ERC written in the repository. But now that it is actually reflecting ERC 20, I think I will pull myself from that being a roadblocker there.
But yeah, are
Amazing.
there any objections to Xenian being an editor?
We haven't finished talking about the main
Oh.
topic.
Sorry.
I mean, it's great that we decided that we can get some CL devs on his editors and they can force merge some CL stuff, but I still want to get ERCs out of this repository. I don't think it's the right place for them. And I really haven't heard any compelling arguments that they should be in here.
Well, I think that the purpose of the EIP's repository is literally any standard relating to Ethereum. I think that is the scope of it. Quite frankly, I don't think that the special rules for core EIPs make sense, like having it turn to final only when it's merged into the quote unquote canonical Ethereum. That doesn't make sense to me, right? Because the standard is final long before that. I think the standard, the status of the standard should reflect
standards and governance, but I think that it's just super contrived. Like core EIPs, the whole goal, you know, we're focused on Ethereum. We don't care about other chains. I don't really care if Avalanche makes an EIP to update their EVM implementation. Our only goal is that we're moving Ethereum L1 forward, and so we're very much tied to the hard fork schedule of Ethereum.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I don't think that the EIP's repository should be the place to make governance decisions. I think that the proposal should all be final, even competing ones, and then the best one is selected to be part of the mainnet.
I mean, I think this is just, I think that this is just like not understanding the process very well, because there's no way that we can make something final before it reaches the testnet. If we make it final before it reaches the testnet and we realize that there's like a small thing that needs to be changed at the last moment, we have to go create a whole new EIP, and this creates a huge, cause of confusion about what is the actual thing that's going in. And so like we have to leave it as last call until we actually start forking testnets, and probably before it gets forked onto mainnet.
Yeah, and that would be the risk of moving it to final before the testnet is made. But nonetheless, I don't think it needs to be the EIP editors' responsibility or anything related to the EIP process's responsibility to care about what has or has not been implemented where.
I'm not really saying that that's not really what I'm asking for. I'm trying to say that I think that the process for ERCs and EIPs are different and that they should be completely separate. Yes, the original scope of the EIP repository was to define all of the standards related to Ethereum, but that was done in 2016. And over the years, we have realized that things that are happening on the application layer are very different than things that are happening at the core layer. And so I'm saying that the scope should be changed at this point in time.
What changes would you propose would be made? What divergences would you like to see in the processes?
I mean, it's not really up for me to say. Like, I think the process that we have right now has been mostly dictated by the needs of the core protocol, with some occasional input from what application developers want in a process. And so it's not really my place to say how the application developers should modify their process to support their workflows. I think the process that we have right now is reasonable for doing core protocol changes, but it's not very good for the application developers. And how do I know it's not very good for the application developers? Because they don't even follow the process. Uniswap launched this big permit 2 contract a few months ago, and they just didn't go through the EIP process at all. They were like, why would we do that? Like, let's just ship it. And this is like the risk that we're having because people don't want to do this process. It doesn't work very well for them.
Well, then we just fix it and like.
But we can't fix it when we don't work at Uniswap.
If everyone is complaining about the same thing, both ELCL and application devs, then that suggests that there's something wrong that should be fixed everywhere and not by forking.
But there's just all people from different perspectives. Like, we need to let the people with those perspectives come in and play a role in pioneering the changes. We can't just like sit here at the top of this pyramid and ask for feedback and then make all of the changes top down. I'm not involved in like high level application development.
Right, they might not be the same disagreements.
Yeah.
Well then why don't they just make a PR modifying EIP1? I mean, that's the entire point of like that we get to almost like crowdsource the process.
I mean, look, I hear you. They should be more involved with the
EIP1.
process. I don't disagree. Like, I'm frustrated they're not more involved with the process. But I think that the right way to get them involved with the process is to sandbox this process away from the core process and let them be the captains of that thing. Let them have ownership and responsibility over this full like end-to-end process. If we add them and involve them in this process, then we have to like really think about what.
I agree with letting the core people do the core stuff and not having to care about the ERC stuff. Nonetheless, I think that they should still remain one repository.
It's just pointless. Like, it's just a pointless semantic. And I'm saying that I've like had quite a bit of feedback about it's too much noise for people to just follow this repository because it's such a grab bag of different things that are happening.
That's what the RSS feeds we're making are for.
I think what team have proposed. I think what team has proposed in 2 steps. The first step is inviting the CL team core to become editors and see if they can still fit in.
This is separate than the CL editors. Yeah. This is separating the ERCs and the EIP repository. We already said that we'll add the CL people as editors and they'll have force merge abilities. I'm saying that we need to get ERCs out of this process as well and let the app developers take the reins and really, manifest the process that they want to have.
I still think that this should be done without separating them. I think they can have different
but
processes.
Why? Like, what is the argument for not separating them?
So that they can interact with one another, so that they're not completely.
There's no need for them to interact with one another. The only time that you need to interact is if you're just saying this relies on this core change. And I don't think the core ever needs to interact back to ERC. Like, there would be no point. I would not accept a core EIP that refers to an ERC.
I think Greg has some strong opinion on this. Shall we wait for him to come on and and have a say on this. We already make some good progress in compromising, and we can also see how it plays out.
He should be here, and I'm sure we'll talk about this many more times. But let's keep going on this for a couple more minutes.
Right, and we are almost out of time for to have this discussion continued. Maybe we can bring it back in the next meeting. For today's, from what we got as a conclusion, that maybe on the tomorrow's CL side, CL meeting, we'll try to talk to CL Dev and see if they are interested to be a part of the process. And maybe if Matt, if you would like, we can bring it back again to hear your arguments of having it separated. Though I feel like when
I'm
this
just tired of
argument is coming,
having these arguments. Like this has been going on for 3 years, and I just want to make it happen. And I don't think that there are any compelling reasons to keep these things together other than this idea of unity. And I'm saying that there is no need for this thing of unity because they are actually not a singular design space anymore. We are very well aware that these are two totally different areas of development, and we should respect that by giving them their own places to define their processes.
Right. As much as I agree, but I think that, this thing coming from more from the ERC authors, that I don't want to be a part of EIP repository. We want to be having a separate repository than code or EIP repository would make more sense to me. But so far, I think we have not received any negative feedback in terms of complaints like ERC authors.
Why would they have negative feedback? They don't care. They don't have to go through this process. But they do have issues. They don't use the process, so they just don't use it, and then they go on with their lives and they launch their projects and their standards, and they just say you should use it because we're Uniswap, or you should use it because we're OpenSeas.
Right. I would maybe slightly differ here, because I have seen, according to EIPS Insight, I have seen that more of ERC proposal merged as final. So they are definitely moving ahead. They are definitely following the process. And limitation.
But how many of these ERCs are coming from top tier teams, things like OpenSeas and Uniswap, the people who should be the most involved with where the space is going in terms of creating standards?
Unfortunately, unless it's required for interop, you're not going to see people writing standards. I don't understand why Uniswap would ever want to write a standard for anything they make.
Well, I mean,
did
you look into Permit 2? Permit
No.
2 is totally something that should be a standard. Permit 2 is this idea that you have this singleton permit contract where you give an allowance, like a max allowance to, and then Uniswap is able to, across all of their different token pairs, rather than giving the allowance to that token pair contract, across all the token pair contracts, it can basically do some sort of authorization via this global permit contract.
So now that there's a global permit contract, why do they need a standard? Or does it only work for Uniswap?
Well, I mean, it works for anybody, but the point of having a standard is that this is an interface that anybody can interoperate with. And
yeah, so but no, the contract is there. The interface is published, so it's done. There is no standard required. You just use the contract like a regular contract, right?
Except I think it would absolutely be worth it for it to be a standard. Take EIP 1820, which is basically the exact same thing, except basically EIP. It's basically EIP 165 on steroids, and with a registry contract instead of each contract implementing a function.
It's less about having the artifact of the standard interface being defined and more about the process of getting to that artifact that I think was missed on Permit 2. Other projects
right,
like
what I'm saying is they aren't building something that warrants a standard. There aren't going to be.
I think they're absolutely.
Why is it not?
Because they built it.
Everybody should use this permit. But everybody should use this permit contract, and so in the interest of doing things in an open way that is amenable to everybody's needs, it would have been a lot better. Uniswap was like, hey, OpenSea, what do you think about this Permit 2 contract? Is this something that you're going to be able to use too? Because if everybody implements their own Permit 2 contract, then the gain is not that large.
Oh, for sure. But for private for-profit companies,
I agree.
Always an incentive to not standardize.
Except Google.
Absolutely.
Take Google, for example. Google has tons of standards with the IETF. like they do have a vested interest in interoperability. There is no difference here.
There's
Can
nothing
I
that we
check?
can do to force the private companies to have these types of standards other than the social pressure. And I think it's like really important that we try and have this social pressure that people are building standards for things that can be utilized
And
by
I
many
do-
different people, and that they do build it in the open.
I agree with you here,
And-
and I do agree that we should make the process easier. But I don't think we should do it by splitting the repo.
I'm sorry to interrupt here. We must have to wrap up now. We are beyond the time. We can definitely bring it back in the next meeting. I just want to make one small point before we wind up. Like what we are doing here is helping people to build a standard. We cannot force people to come and build a standard with us. So it is totally up to people who want to contribute, who want to help other people out.
But
What
we
we
can
can
help people
ensure
by making the process easier. And that's
yeah, but what we can do is just by making the process easier. So we can rather focus on what are the challenges, what are the friction that people are feeling here and try to resolve that. I think this would be a good point to maybe wrap up and have, if people would like, we can have it discussed in the next meeting. Anyway, we have to see the result that is coming up from DCL team or more EIP editors if they are willing to join. Any final comment, thoughts anybody would like to add before we just close for today?
Yeah, I just want to quickly check if do the temper check for adding me as an editor.
I think Light Client was the only objection.
I mean, I haven't really seen a whole lot of editing in the last month and a half, frankly.
I can try to help.
I think he is more I think he is more than capable as an editor, and I think that's primarily because right now his suggested edits have basically no weight because he's not an editor yet.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that we need to be bringing people into the process who are involved with client teams. And that's like my main focus. I think if you wanted to come on as an ERC editor, then that would be great. But I am like worried about adding more people who have the power of controlling what the like standardization process is for core EIPs who aren't involved with the core process at all.
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm
just
totally okay
Yeah.
serving as ERC editor.
Yeah, I
And to
think that
begin
would be a
with,
good start. Like
now we have
Matt
this
is
really
for core.
difficult-
Yeah, please go ahead.
Now we have this really difficult problem though, where it's like, and this is why I want to separate these repositories, because how do we like have this conversation about changing the process? And I am saying like, I don't feel super comfortable about adding more people who have the ability to change the EIP core process, who aren't involved with these client teams. And so what, like you're just supposed to not participate when we start talking about changing the core process? Like this is a very confusing way, and we haven't had an editor added in this manner before.
yeah, I'm in favor of letting CL and EL and core devs to make the whole decision about the core EIP editing rules. I can refrain from participating at all. Yeah, that's totally okay. And then I actually don't have a strong opinion there.
Do you guys see why this makes much more sense if these were two separate things, where we don't even have to have this? It's like, oh, we're about to talk about a course standard change. Victor is not going to participate in this specific discussion, blah, blah, blah.
We already have different editors, right, in our bot metadata.
No, I'm talking about
core-
these types of meetings. We have great tooling for dealing with this on the PR level. I'm talking about at this meeting level when we start talking about, you know, we want to have this change. Like, what if we want to change the statuses or something for core EIP, got a new status, like about to go in a hard fork, right? Like having these discussions, I'm saying that I don't want to be adding more editors into these conversations who don't have context about what it's actually like viewing the process as a client implementer.
Yeah, I can totally refrain from commenting on the core EIP process as an ERC editor for sure. Yeah, I totally understand that you need more context on that side to comment on that. Would that resolve your concern?
Yeah, I mean, this resolves my concern on that front. I still think that this is like a muddied situation of having the ERCs and EIPs together. To me, this is like a very clear reason to have them separate, but we're not going to resolve that for a while. So I'm happy to move forward with this agreement.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. I'm not sure, like Sam has already dropped off. So do we have a consensus here? Like, what are we trying to conclude out of this?
If I were
would
to
post the
summarize,
consensus. Yeah, I would just post it on the PR and make sure that Sam backs the agreement.
Okay, that makes sense.
thanks, Matt.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you guys. Thank you for joining us today. Hope to see you in 2 weeks. Have a good one, everyone.